You're watching In Search of Fun.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to the In Search of Fun podcast. I'm Dennis, and I couldn't be more excited to be with you guys today to do our first book review. Same as ever, A Guide to What Never Changes by Morgan Housel. Look, we all know that the world is changing rapidly these days. If there's one thing we can count on, it's change. To the point, it almost feels as though the ground is constantly shifting under our feet a little. We spend so much time focusing on what's changing in the moment over recent history and what we think is likely to change next. But what if the most important thing for us to get our arms around is actually what's not likely to change in the future? That is the premise for Morgan Housel's second book, Same as Ever. And I have to say, it is one of the best books that I've read in a long time. One of the best books that I've read in 2025 for sure, top 5, and I found it incredibly insightful. Morgan Housel is not a complete rookie at this. He actually also wrote The Psychology of Money. The Psychology of Money is a book that I read a couple of years ago. I didn't realize that he had put this book out as a follow-up, and where The Psychology of Money is focused on individual decision-making. How individual humans think about finance and money-related behavior. Same as Ever shifts from that micro lens to more of a macro lens, looking at broader patterns of human behavior and timeless principles that we can grasp onto as we plan for the future. This is a really easy read. It's only 240 pages. It released just about 2 years ago on November 7th of 2023. You can find it in hardcover. You can find it in softcover. You can find it as an ebook or on different audiobook websites and apps. And look, this book is great because it's so snackable. Housel describes the book as 23 short stories or essays that offer meditations on behavior, risk, change, and ultimately patterns that repeat themselves. And this book is exactly what it purports to be. It is indeed greatly appreciated as a reader who doesn't need to be sold on the same concept 5 different ways before moving on to the next. Housel makes his points and then he moves on to the next clear point to make. And I came away feeling like, wow, how do I boil down the most resonant points for me into one podcast without giving the whole book away? So, spoiler alert, I've tried to do my best on that and we'll get to it in a second. As I mentioned, when we think about the high-level premise of this book, if we were going to boil it down to a single sentence, I would say that Same as Ever argues that while the world changes in unpredictable ways, there are many fundamental elements of human behavior and decision-making that never change, and that understanding what doesn't change gives us clarity, it gives us resilience, and it gives us better decision frameworks to lean on, especially in uncertain times. And life is cyclical. We have times of certainty, we have times of uncertainty, and then times where it's somewhere in between. Now, Housel achieves this by constantly focusing on the juxtaposition of constant truths and expiring trends, calling out those things that may seem like lasting pillars of life that never change, but actually indeed are a trend for us not to be too dependent on. And that helps us frame up how to think about risk, deep diving into human psychology, the role of compounding in success, patience in success, seeing life through long horizons, and survivorship. These are all really key themes for this book. And to me, it's very timely. We live in a world today, again, where things are changing rapidly. I think about AI first and the impact that AI is having practically on our world, but also theoretically. And the excitement that it brings out in certain people, and then the utter fear that it brings out in others. We are living in a world that is fixated in many ways on novelty, on brand new innovations, on disruption and groundbreaking new ideas. And in forecasting the future, we rely on these things. What is AI going to mean in the future? But Same as Ever says, wait. Let's look backward and see what's always been a part of our story as humans, as a society, as a country in the United States. And then let's map that out first before we start focusing so much on what new, big, innovative thing is going to change our world. And that's helpful because as we plan for the future, it's easy to get overwhelmed with emotion. And when we get overwhelmed with emotion, we step further and further away from logic. We become susceptible to volatility, to the negativity of news cycles, to the uncertainty of everyday life. And let's be honest, that is the one thing we can count on. And this book touches on that. Every 10 years or so, something uncertain, something really unpredictable happens. And we've got to accept that that unpredictability and its predictability is key to understanding, planning for, and enduring life, especially when it gets hard. I think this book helps shift the reader's lens. Instead of trying to predict what will change, focusing on what will never change, it's just a really powerful reframing of the mindset for life and for decision making. Okay, so 23 short stories. I ended up jotting down 14 key themes across these different 23 stories that really resonated with me. And then I said, I don't want to give away the whole book. This is not a spoilers heavy podcast, but I did want to share enough to hopefully get you to go read the book yourself. So I tried to boil it down to the 5 themes that stuck with me the most. The first theme is that real risk is what's left over after you've prepared for all the risks that you can imagine. Real risk is the unforeseeable after you've already prepped for all of the foreseen. And being smart alone does not optimize for risk. There are several stories in the book about very smart people who didn't prepare for all the foreseeable risks and thus were taken down by those and the unforeseeable. And it focuses on the idea that the same traits that fuel one's rise are often those that bring us down to earth. This is not surprising. A fundamental truth, in my opinion, of life is that people's greatest strengths are almost always their greatest weaknesses as well. And life is about finding that equilibrium where you're bringing out the best in yourself and you're minimizing those things that maybe you're not as proud of. That the ways that, maybe your passion or your strengths might not always manifest in the most healthy way. Everybody has that struggle. Everybody fights that battle in life. And hopefully the older and the more wise and experienced we get, the better we are at striking that balance. And I loved a quote in this chapter. It says, reversion to the mean is one of the most common stories in history. So just also remembering that even when times are great, there's going to be a flip side to that in the future. Life is cyclical. There are ups and there are downs. And when you are down, you can't just say, oh, everything's going to revert to the mean. It's fine. But you can know that it will get better. And when things are great, you should remember that there will be challenges in the future. That is just life. And it poses a few key questions that really resonated with me and I wanted to pose to you all. The first one is, who do we want to admire? It talks a lot about being careful about admiring things or ideas that a person has versus admiring everything about a person, because people are all complex humans. They're not inherently great or inherently bad. They're all inherently flawed and inherently complex. So who do we want to admire? Who do we want to emulate? When we have role models are a good thing. But who do we want to emulate and who do we want to be? That's the ultimate question. Who do we want to be every day? You have an opportunity to wake up and choose to be the best version of yourself. What is that? So all of that rolled up under the first key theme of real risk is what's left over after you've prepared for all the risks you can imagine. The second theme that really stuck with me is the importance of great storytelling cannot be overstated. This is so true. People don't necessarily want your numbers. They want your accuracy. They don't necessarily always want to be told the hardest, coldest truth. They want to be comforted that there is a path forward. There's a quote in here that has really, really hit me hard. And I've thought about it a lot, and I've thought about how it applies in so many different facets of life. It says every company's stock value is simply a number from today multiplied by a story about tomorrow. That is so true. It's true about stocks. It's true about ideas. It's true about relationships. It is, your strength is in understanding where you are today, and hopefully you're picking a number from today that makes sense and is grounded in reality, multiplied by a vision and a story for tomorrow, which you hope is grounded in reality. Optimistic, yes, we should always be optimistic, shoot for the stars, but grounded in reality. And stakeholders, really everyone in life, what they want to hear is a compelling story, not just a numbers lecture. And ultimately, what they really want is not just for that story to be compelling, but also correct. When you look at where the stock market is today, you hear a lot of these analysts and pundits, and they say, the stock market keeps going up, up, and up. And with tariffs and interest rates and all these things, that every time one of these big economic shifts would happen, the knee-jerk reaction, and seemingly understandably so, was this is going to be bad for the economy. This is going to be bad for the stock market. It could cause a recession. People better hold on tight. And yet, every step of the way, the stock market has gone up. People who are invested in the stock market, which is more than 50% of Americans today, have gotten wealthier. And really, why not? Because the stories we're telling ourselves about the future, even though so many people in the present are struggling, the numbers today, it seems, are less important than the story about tomorrow. And the story about tomorrow is still more than compelling enough for people to keep their money in the stock market, and when they have more, to put it there as well. It's really interesting. And isn't this true for ourselves as well? For our own pursuit of hope, of optimism, and vision for the future. We tell ourselves where we are today. And for some of us, that's a very positive story. For some of us, that's a very negative story. For some of us, it's very mixed. For most of us, right? The 95%, it's very mixed because life is tough. Even in the best of times, my mom would always say to me, it doesn't matter how successful somebody seems, how great their life is, everybody is climbing a mountain. And you have to appreciate that and understand that and accept that. It doesn't matter how much money they have or how many friends they have or what luck they've had in life. Everyone is climbing a mountain, and you can't understand it without walking in their shoes. So give grace. And I think, it's important that we are honest with ourselves about where we are, and we don't get too high and we don't get too low. And the book talks about that. And it's important that we tell ourselves a story about tomorrow that is realistic and achievable, but optimistic, and is a reflection of what we are capable of much more than where we are today. And I think having those goals are important. Having goals and plans and writing them down, that's really important. Two more things that stuck with me here. Good stories can grow great ideas many times over simply by explaining them better than they've ever been explained. You need to read about this in the book. I don't want to dive too much into this. I am somebody that uses a lot of metaphors. And look, I'm a volume shooter. Sometimes they land and sometimes they don't. But I believe very deeply in the idea that KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Take these complex ideas and put them into terms that everyone can understand. Because when everybody has that common denominator of understanding, then we can have real discourse. And when we can have real discourse, our ideas can come to a head, and from that can flow the best ideas and even the best version of the best ideas. So that really stuck with me. And then the second thing was, there is so much opportunity in finding ways to do existing things materially better. There are a lot of people that are, putting a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of energy into the next big thing, into AI and all that. And this is just a reminder that there are a lot of things that we do today that could be done 10% better, that could be fulfilling for you as a person, could impact humans, could impact businesses, could impact the world in a positive way, and could be pretty lucrative. Like, go look at the areas of investment and commerce today. If you have an idea on how something could be made fundamentally better, why not chase it? Why not give it a shot? I really believe that this is right. There are new ways of looking at things that create greater innovation than simply finding new things to do. Okay, moving on to our third of our 5 key themes. This is maybe the one, if somebody said to me, what is the theme that you would want everybody in the world to understand? I would say it's this one, even though sometimes I do lose sight of this myself. And I think as humans, it's normal to lose sight of this every once in a while. But the theme is this: what's rational to one person can be completely crazy to the next. And for me, there are so many lessons in this one seemingly obvious statement. First, every human mind is unique. And no two people think exactly the same way. We know that, right? Like the human brain, every single one is unique. So don't be surprised when you agree violently with somebody about one thing and then disagree violently with them on another. In a perfect world, the agreement wouldn't be the sole reason to be affiliated or friends with somebody. And the area of disagreement wouldn't be a reason or purpose for defriending somebody. It feels like in our world today, there are very partisan lines drawn in a lot of weird ways. And once we disagree with somebody on something, people tend to separate. And that's unfortunate because, again, that actually extinguishes discourse and that limits the flow of ideas. And fewer ideas mean we have less of a chance to get to the best ones, much less the best version of the best ones. As a second kind of theme within the theme of what's rational to one person being completely crazy to the next, be careful who you idolize. The same things that may lead you to admire the out-of-the-box thinking of a person may also lead you to think twice about how they think in another regard. It is okay to admire the idea without idolizing the ideator. We've talked about that in our household. 16 and 13-year-old kids, we listen to a lot of music, a lot of throwback music. If you go back, just in music, but you could do this in any form of entertainment, really in any form of life. Humans are inherently flawed. There are a lot of great artists, not great people necessarily, but great artists that make great music who have done some really bad things. And we've said in our house, you got to separate the person from the music in a lot of cases. And in some instances, that's easier for me to do with Michael Jackson. I still listen to Michael Jackson music. R. Kelly, I don't. I don't know why I draw that line, but it is a line that gets drawn. And I can't begrudge somebody else who says both Michael Jackson and R. Kelly are off the table for me, just as much as I can't judge somebody who says they're both on the table for me. That's okay. We're all human, right? But be careful who you idolize because, again, they may not hold all of the same points of view as you, and you may be surprised by that down the line. It's best if you just go in with the expectation that every person you meet, if you had the ability to know everything they believed, there are almost always going to be a bunch of things you agree with, a bunch of things you don't agree with, and a bunch in the middle that you just got to think about a lot harder. The third theme within a theme here is expect the unexpected. The most fundamental reality of life is that the world is not a predictable, rational place. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but this is what this theme really digs into. There is, quote, constant uncertainty, misunderstanding, and the inability to know what people will do next. That is so true. Humans have free will and the ability to take actions that you might think are totally logical and you might think are totally crazy. Expect the unexpected in life. Hopefully, the unexpected doesn't manifest, but expect it because eventually it will. And then finally, as a fourth theme within the theme, and this is one from my mom, Margie Ann, take joy in the 80% in life. This really came out in this book, that it's not always going to be great. It's never always going to be great. And as my mom always said, if you're 80% happy with something or more, count the win. There's a quote in the book that says, there's no world where every business or investing decision will align with your own hopes and dreams of how things should be. That is so true. We've all got to compromise at least a little bit. All right, moving on to our fourth theme, a most convenient size. This one is another that I have thought about so much since reading this book. There's a quote that I want to lead with. It says, "A proper state where things work well but break when you try to scale them to a different size or speed. That is a most convenient size." It doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and grow. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't aspire to expand, to broaden, to deepen your offering, your goals, your results. But it is acknowledging the reality that if you go at a pace that is not befitting of your product, of your team, of your market, you can't force it. And ultimately, you will pay the price. I have spent a lot of time pondering this. I believe that there was once a world, especially when you think of corporate America and what we expect from companies, from publicly traded companies. We just saw EA go from a publicly traded company, and they're not private yet, but private equity comes in, the Saudi private investment fund comes in, and now EA looks like it's going to become a private company. But the entire time that they were a public company, they were like every other public company. Every single quarter, they had pressure to announce higher revenues, higher profits, and a brighter vision for the future. Going back to what I was saying, I believe that there was once a world, perhaps years before my lifetime, where the concept of a most convenient size was actually a widely held truth. Everything from cars to homes to corporations, investors for many decades, enduring countless major conflicts and long bouts of economic uncertainty, told themselves realistic, maybe even pessimistic stories about tomorrow in projecting their numbers of the day. Fast forward to today, where we live in this world where constant growth is a baseline expectation, and I get it. I have to admit, I am a person who is motivated to keep growing. I don't ever want to set a personal record and say that's the best I can ever do. My attitude is always, how do we get better than that? How do we get 1% better every day? But where that can be a strength, that can also be a challenge. Quarter after quarter, year after year, the goal is always to grow to new heights, and there can be consequences with that are very real and often very painful when that growth doesn't materialize. Businesses can shrink, cash can get very tight. That can lead to projects getting canceled, units being laid off, lives impacted. So not only must the actual numbers keep growing today, but a great deal must also be invested in crafting and landing a compelling enough story about tomorrow to keep that stock price moving up. That's a challenging balance, but it's also a reality of the world in which we live today. And I think it is easy to look back fondly on the concept of a world where everything had a most convenient size. I just think the more we consider this phrase and what it really means today, what it has meant, it's evolving, right? Some things just aren't well poised for growth and should remain a certain size, but most things just need to be very thoughtfully grown. I've worked on gaming franchises that had a lot of strengths, that catered extremely well to core audiences that they reached already, but they simply weren't the broad, appealing genres or games that historically attracted the millions and millions and millions of gamers that you get for a Fortnite or for a Call of Duty. And there was always a tension in product questions about, well, how much do you invest in trying to grow the audience by trying new and different things that maybe that core audience there today doesn't care about, but somebody who's not interested in what's there today might be lured by. You certainly don't want to alienate the people that are keeping you in business today, but if you really want to grow, what do? Per the book, the lesson here really boils down to two key words: patience and scarcity. It's easier in theory than it is in practice, but the quote that stuck with me says, most great things in life, from love to careers to investing, gain their value from two things: patience and scarcity. The patience to let something grow, and the scarcity to truly admire what it grows into. I believe this so much, and I wish that, as simple as this is not rocket science. I wish that I had read this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because it has made its way deep into my brain, and thinking about how, as we seek to grow things, we have to always be mindful, front of mind, not back of mind, of the balance of patience and scarcity. That we don't rush things into growing into something that they can't be, or into growing into something that they can be, but faster than they realistically can get there. And the scarcity to know that if you take your time and you invest wisely and you provide the right information and resources and support, that you can grow something incredibly special. And have had the incredible privilege and honor in my career, whether that was Xbox Game Pass or working on NBA 2K or working on any number of other projects like PGA Tour 2K, which was one of the highlights of my entire career. I've seen how the combination of patience and scarcity can lead to things that imprint on us as humans and can imprint on an entire industry and the history that people will read about years and years and years down the line. All right, the fifth theme, the final theme that I'd like to share with everybody today, and again, there are many, many more in the book that I hope you go read and discover for yourself. It says the importance of having a purpose and being all in on it. I believe so much in this. You've got to have a purpose, and when you've got a purpose, be all in on it. It's okay to pivot later. It's okay to say, hey, I had a purpose, I was going down this path, and for these reasons, this is not the right path for me anymore. But you've got to have a purpose as a human being. My mom always said, people need a purpose. It can and probably will change many times throughout our lives. But human beings have a fundamental need for purpose, a reason to not just get out of bed in the morning, but to derive the spirit and the energy to tackle the day head on. She would always say, if you ever feel lost, reground yourself in your purpose and give it everything you've got. And if you ever feel like you can't find your purpose, then make it giving back to others. She always said, give freely of yourself and good things will come to you. If ever you are lost, figure out how you can give freely to others and you will get back on track. This chapter, when the magic happens, it shines such a beautiful light on this universal truth. There is such beauty in the struggle of life when you're intentional. There is a quote that says, what makes life mean something is a sense of purpose, a goal, the battle, the struggle, even if you don't win it. I think this was a Winston Churchill quote, but I didn't write it down in my notes. And so if I got that wrong, I'm sorry. But there is a Winston Churchill quote in that chapter, and I think it's this one. Could be wrong. There's a second quote, though, that also stuck with me. It says, most successful people are just a walking anxiety disorder harness for productivity. And this is so true. This is so true. The people that I've met in life that are, quote unquote, the highest performing, they tend to work ad nauseum. They don't take care of their bodies. They don't have hobbies. They don't derive pleasure from anything but the identity that is their professional life. I would be lying if I said there were not points in life where on the spectrum of focusing on who you are as an individual versus being a cog for the machine, I was far too much leaning to the end of cog for the machine. I would like to say now today, and for multiple years now, I'm in a much better place where I'm much more focused on Dennis the individual. But it really comes down to a sense of, one, having a purpose and making sure that that purpose is something that is there for you. That, hey, if you're working really hard for a company and you're getting a lot out of that for your own intrinsic value, if it truly is for your own intrinsic value as well as the value that you're delivering to the company, great. But if you're not, if you're miserable every day and you're working 60 hours a week, accruing all of this value to a job that doesn't define you, it doesn't fulfill you, it doesn't give you a sense of purpose that gets you out of bed ready to face the day, well, if you want something different, and I would think in that situation, you might want something different, you got to do something different. And I think as somebody who, again, might have qualified under this umbrella a bit in the past, I'd say that this is not done to us. It's something that we do to ourselves by failing to set proper work-life boundaries. It's what happened to me. When you become a victim of your own success and you achieve a lot and then more gets piled on your plate and you feel a deep sense of obligation to achieve all of that at an A+ level, and then that leads to more on your plate and you never set those guardrails, nobody knows. Is it their fault? No. You got to set guardrails in life. You got to have a purpose, but you've got to make sure that you give space in your own life to be purposeful. And that's something that I tell people all the time, especially young people who are coming out of undergrad, who are coming out of MBA programs. When they say, I'm looking for my first job, what do you recommend? What advice do you have? I always say, look, work very hard. Focus on impact and influence. It's not about titles. It's not about money. It's about impact and influence. But set guardrails and know that the guardrails that you set very early in your career, you're going to have less freedom than the guardrails that you set later in your career. But you've got to set guardrails nonetheless. And I think this chapter, the importance of having a purpose and being all in on it, it really resonates when you think about how we position ourselves, how we balance our time, how we balance our sense of purpose, and how we ensure that we're moving through life with a sense of fulfillment and that we're heading in a direction of travel that we want to be heading, and that's going to give us fulfillment in the future as well. All right, so to wrap up, I loved this book for two reasons. One, it is exactly what it promises to be. A bunch of short, digestible, highly insightful short stories that make for a fun and super easy read. And two, the premise of the book is spot on. It's so easy to get lost in chasing the rapid evolutions happening in the world day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. But we should never lose sight of what isn't changing and how we can harness those truths to guide our expectations and our decision-making in the future. I touched on the 5 key lessons that really stuck with me, but there were many more I had taken note of. I would share those, but as I mentioned, I really want to give everybody who is watching this video an opportunity to pick up the book for themselves and discover a lot of these themes on their own and decide what they mean for you as a person based on your lived experiences. Thank you all so much for watching. We are so excited to be here with In Search of Fun. And if you don't mind, please consider giving us a like and a subscribe. Have a great day. I hope everybody has a chance to find some fun.